Hey, what's up, YouTube? Welcome to my first Dungeon Master video for journal video of my games. Bye. Cool. Let's dive into this. So, I wanted to make a video about my most recent game. Actually, this happened 2 games ago. Warpshell Dragon, a new series that I started and I hope will go on for a very long time. I have found some terrific players, and to tell you the truth, they make all the difference. If you're having a game and it's not successful, it may not be you. It may be the chemistry of the group you're with. And getting together, 4 random people and having them play nice together is not always a guarantee thing. So thankfully, the Runehammer community attracts a lot of folks of sort of the similar mindset in their gaming, who really enjoy sort of the thought process that goes into all of this, and great fruits have been found. I'm overwhelmingly happy with how it's going so far, and I hope this goes on a long time. So I'm going to talk about the things I liked, the things I didn't like, and try to keep this quick, a couple of room mechanics, and hopefully this will help you run your game just a tiny bit better from my lessons learned. So this is my landing page. These are our characters for our adventure. It started here in the skies of Bastion. The setup for this room is that the players discover that there is a villain. So they're introduced to one of the main arc villains right from the start. He is utterly insane. His people were murdered and devoured by the Devourer, and not just killed, but it sort of alluded that their timelines, like the time space attached to them, was also destroyed. So like they don't even exist in like parallel worlds and timescapes, which is a dark, crazy thought. So he's driven to madness, and he feels like the only way out is to help others die so that they can avoid that fate of having their time, their souls, or whatever it is that attaches to them, escape from being destroyed. So he comes into Bastion and starts blowing up planets. The players zoom in. They encounter a fleet of Psyker Scout fleet, because the people of Bastion don't have a fleet of their own. They're a little bit like Mennonites, sort of rejected space technology for the most part. They've got a little bit of it here and there, but nothing, major, like giant starships floating around. The people of Bastion want them to stop this super weapon that's blowing up their planets, and the Psyker fleet, they want the Warpshell people to go and take on the people in the bridge to capture the war criminal who's causing all this mess. So there's a little bit of a moral dilemma that gets presented to the players as we go through the story. They have, on one side of the starship, the bridge where the captain is, the guy who they want to capture, Commander Nero, or backwards spelled Orin, ha ha ha, Trixie. Or they need to go to the rear of the carrier, in which case they can shut down the power center and stop the weapon. And it's sort of presented in such a way where they don't really get to do both. They're going to be in a position where they've got to do one or the other. And it's because the weak point to entry, to get onto the ship, is right here in the center, which they're able to discover through the course of play. What I didn't like about this encounter was that running the space mechanics, I didn't quite have them worked out in my head, and I felt it was sloppy, and it wasn't very tight or as exciting as I kind of hoped it would be, and I'm going to make some big improvements on that in the future. Alright, this next room they poured into, this one worked out really great. Their pod, smashes through the wall, and a shield kind of comes up behind to prevent them from being leaked out into space. Room mechanic wise, I had kind of what I thought was an interesting enemy. I took these little swarm tokens that come inside of, I believe, the core set. And I had them be... Ooh, let's see if we can find it there. There it is. So I had them be these defensive drones. And I thought it would be interesting if they flew down. They had sort of a couple of little things going on, right? They were hard to hit while they were flying around, but they were easy to hit once they latched onto a player. So there's sort of a symmetry there in their design. Once they latch onto a player, they would start to emit an electrical shock, which couldn't be dodged. Like, they don't even have to roll. It just happens. They just start taking the damage while it's attached to them. But, of course, they're easy to take down once they're attached. So that worked out really well. There was also a guy right here next to this terminal thing, which was going to have the job of spawning more if he wasn't taken care of. And the players shut him down immediately. I find that players are smart. They'll catch on almost immediately if your room has some kind of key or MacGuffin, and it doesn't take a lot, right? Like if there's a bunch of enemies that are the same and only one enemy that's different, most players are smart enough to say, hey, let's lock down that one guy who's different because he's going to do something unexpected. And it worked. I also threw in a nice little treat, so our first loot roll. I think your first campaign adventure should always be treated a little bit like a one-shot because A, it might go terribly wrong, in which case nobody ever plays with you again in that game, and then it is a one-shot. And B, one-shots have a little bit of a higher excitement level. I designed the one-shots so that they go from start to finish in one session. Try really hard to make sure it'll fit in one session. And if the players, plow through it too soon, I've got some extra rooms set up just sort of to throw in if I need to, so I can keep the balance of time right. I only do this in the first game of the campaign because if you do it every single game, it can start to feel a little bit forced. If you let your rooms start and stop in the middle of things, in the middle of story beats, when you're running a full-on campaign, it feels a little bit more like a campaign, and the players will feel like they're more in control and they're not just being pushed, from point A to B. And you want that. You want your players to feel like they're in charge, and you want them to be in charge if you can make it work. Oh boy. Excuse me here. Okay, back on. After this room, they chose to save the planets instead of capture the villain, which is really handy because it meant that I could take that same villain and keep him going in a future arc. I created rooms, though, just in case they chose the opposite direction, and we'll show those at the end. So this was my middle room. This room is a dirty, rotten DM trick because this would have happened regardless of whether they chose path A or B. And it's because it sort of starts laying the seeds that there's this ancient genome imperial empire that has fallen in the background, and they find these tanks in the science lab that have bodies floating into them, and all of these little tokens were on my GM layer, and I dropped them down into play once they would go and sort of inspect, so they could see what was in these tanks, these badass ghost armor things. They also found a NPC. I threw a little roleplay encounter in here. This little NPC sort of approached and started talking to them and welcoming them to the science lab and talking about the doctor. I led seeds about there being a doctor because I had, in stealth, I had another Zill who is basically an insane mad doctor, and he was wearing an invisibility suit to avoid detection because he knew the ship had been aborted. And of course, once the players started sort of spreading out to investigate all the different things in the room, he stabbed the bard in the back right over here and dropped him pretty much in one hit. I think he rolled a crit. I have to go back and check the video to remember for sure. There was a major distraction in here, though, which I meant to be a treat, but the players could not see it any other way than a threat, which was that I have this sort of robot token I created. And the idea here was that they would be able to use the computer to take command of the robot, and it might help them throughout the rest of the adventure. Did not work that way. They made friends with the NPC robot and drug it around on their adventure, and they thought this thing was going to wake up and murder them all. So they spent a lot of time trying to foil this thing and sort of ignoring a lot of what else was going on as a timer mechanism, because I wanted the tension to build, so I brought in a room timer here in this one. I threw down D4 and I started counting down for when these tanks would empty out and these ghost soldiers would wake up. And the players just sort of instinctively decided they didn't want to mess with the ghost soldiers and they needed to get the hell out of there. I did a lot of talking up about how dangerous they were and how terrible they were going to be. So they fled the room. Before they did, they looted this alchemy table and picked up a vial of a chemical. And I knew the chemical was going to be there. I didn't really know what it was going to do, which is another kind of dirty, rotten GM trick. I'll often put things in the environment which players can interact with, and I don't have an answer to it. I picked this up playing with Runehammer because he does this kind of thing. And it's nice because it means that it can eventually be whatever you need it to be in the situation. Vinzo was down, he was out, so I decided, well, you know what? It's in this Imperial lab, and they're messing with this technology they can't possibly understand, and I have ideas in my head about what Imperial technology is. I think it uses nanites to reproduce sort of the effect of like necromancy. And so Vinzo downs this bottle of potion, and so I made it like a big thing. Like he gains a heart out of it and is healed up, coming into the final room. And yeah, it's kind of gonna have a cursed. There's a gonna bite you in the rear effect to that though, because he's starting to hallucinate, and he's gonna have a unique connection to the Imperium throughout the rest of the adventure, which is great. Anytime you can bind your players into the setting with some kind of ongoing thing, and it works and it doesn't feel forced, do it every time. So at this point we actually leave this room and we go into kind of a theater of the mind where I'm describing going through these long hallways and down elevator shafts and doing all this stuff. You want to give them the feeling that it's a really huge space when it's actually just a couple of rooms. That's how you sort of deliver the roleplay element. And if time had gone quick, right? Like, because there was literally just the one doctor in this room and then all the stuff to look at, which is just mostly going to be a seed to the adventure. If time had not gone on our side, I had created a kind of a dummy room I could throw in. It's just sort of a standard long hall with like a pit and some rubble because the spaceship is under attack, and some vents in the wall. And I just would have dropped probably more of the defense drones in here, and maybe a robot or something for them to do battle if that had come up. But didn't come up. The timing worked out just right, as it often does. 3 rooms takes about 4 hours, which is pretty good. So they ended up in the engineering bay. And let me move this out of the way. So there's this big, obvious sort of power generator here. I had this giant robot token, which I deleted after it was destroyed, right here. And it was guarding the power supply. And this encounter is a beautiful example. Like, what I loved about this encounter is that it went completely the wrong way compared to what I thought it was going to go. And when I say the wrong way, I don't mean like it was bad. I mean like I thought that they were going to do this, and that. And they totally went with like plan C, and it worked, and it was much better. Players that are good are going to surprise you every time. And it worked out so much better. So they ended up sort of setting up a bomb situation where they took the core from this robot, and they were going to detonate it, and it's going to blow up the crystal, but it also might blow up the whole room, and there are these like toxic barrels in here and a bunch of equipment. And so on the fly, here's another dirty rotten DM trick. Leave stuff in your environment that could be exits or nothing, right? Like this is a shaft. This could have been an equipment shaft that went to nowhere. This could have been a event to the outside world, and I just sort of on the fly improv that, yeah, this is a waste disposal chute where they drop these toxic waste barrels that come out of the engine so that they can get out into space. So the players sacrificed their little robot friend. It went over and opened up the chute while they were sucked out into space. The room blows up, left behind this nice, satisfying crater. So they were able to disable the ship. And then from there, that's sort of the peak of the adventure. After that, I took them to this sort of screen I had set up where it's just sort of the Warpshell floating over a planet. And we had a nice little RP session to sort of go through what happens, right? So the planets are saved. They save billions of lives, which is, plus, always a good thing. The Psychers were pissed because the commander escaped, and I was going to have them leave, but the players, the roleplay changed everything, right? The players started talking to these different NPC groups and coming up with different ideas. I knew that the Warpshell was going to have been damaged in the adventure and that it had a power core. And in my head, I figured the next step was going to be going down to one of the moons of Bastion and trying to raid a mine that had been taken over by zealots and trying to get a new power crystal for their Warpshell. Right? Classic setup. Ship was damaged, go get something to fix it. Well, the players rolled like a nat 20 out of nowhere and convinced the Psyker fleet, even though they were kind of upset with them, to come and restore the Warpshell to fix its damage right there in that session. They did it. But I kind of tied into it that if they did it, they were going to have to come aboard. And I think that the players all sort of got this weird hint, like, oh god, if they come aboard, is that good or bad? Like, are they going to mess with the Warpshell? I mean, the Warpshell is alien technology to the Psychers. It's a thing that's raised, like a biological ship that's raised back in Zenobia. Zeno? I'm sure somebody will correct me in the comments. You know what? I've got it right here. Zivos. Yes, Zivos. This is my journal, by the way. This is how I conceived all of this. This is how I set up my journals. I've got the characters. And then when I knew this was going to be a campaign, I kind of came up with some different ideas and things for the intro. I actually recorded a little voice file, which was just sort of creepy. And then I started sort of thinking about, like, what are going to be the connections between the players and the world after they do this adventure. That's the thing I do because I think that you want to, like I said, you want to create bonds between your players and the world so that they feel attached to it. I had gone through and just sort of created a bunch of locations out of the core book and just sort of filled in details about it so we'd be able to be maybe a little more sandboxy in deciding where they wanted to go next. And some artifacts that are going to be of major importance to the adventure. And then we've got, you see my session OneNotes here are really sparse. That's because I ended up having to think about a lot of the hard mechanics at work, right? And I jotted them down on this tiny little piece of paper on my lunch break. And I pretty much ran the night off of this little paper and off of Trello. And it's literally broken out into like room 1, drones, repairman, Zill repairman. Room 2, lurker, guy hiding in ghost armor. Room 3, I had Zill prisoners, which were basically, I played it out that the Zill that were aboard this ship, they thought their commander was insane too, but he had control over all the weapons and the robots and everything, so they didn't have much of a choice. And then, of course, Killer Robot, that was my monster name. Power words like that are great when you're trying to think of, don't try to think of like, oh man, this is going to be a Sturge from the monster manual on page whatever. Just think about like the effect that you want to have and just start attaching power words to it. And that will help you be a better DM that just sort of can improv things on the fly. Because then you're not focused on what is it so much as what does it do, which is very important in a role-playing game, especially if you're going to go into a theater of mind space. You just need to describe what it does, and the rest of the details you just cook up as you go. This works for some people, it doesn't work for others. Works for me, so that's what I'm sharing. If they had gone plan B and decided to go after the commander, I was prepared to run an additional room that I worked out. And some advice that I'm actually got from Matt Colville, which I think was really good, which is that a lieutenant's job is to escape, so they can go on and be the next great villain adventure. So if they had managed to take down Commander Oren, then its lieutenant, I didn't even have a name cooked up for it, but I would have thought of one then, was going to sort of escape through one of these chutes, so that they would have to still contend with something to chase after if they wanted to. Because I really, told them straight out when they got to the planet, screen, this is the world of Warpshell. If you guys know of a different place from the core that you've read that you want to visit, we can go there. Just tell me where it is, and the Warpshell will head that way. Or do you want to follow sort of the main thread, which I've created, which is that you got a villain who is off his rocker, insanely powerful, and has had a bunch of Imperial research, and he's just taken off for the Imperial Belt. They wanted to chase him into the Imperial Belt. So we'll do another DM video after I post that game, where I'll talk about what worked in that, what didn't work. I hope this was helpful. If not, let me know in the comments. Give me a thumbs down. If you thought this was useful, give me a thumbs up. If you think these need to be longer, shorter, if you want less detail, more detail, or no detail, let me know down in the below section there in the comments. I am super appreciative of the community that we've managed to build here, and you guys are amazing. It's the fuel that keeps me going in all of this, and I appreciate every single one of you. So, have a great day, have a great game. If you have any questions, post in the comments. Later!